All the time this had been going on, the little monkeys hadn't made a sound. Oh, sorry, part 2, chapter 4. They just stood there in a bunch, watching every move the big monkey made. About that time, one of them decided that as long as there were some apples around, he may as well have one. He left the bunch, and with his skinny tail sticking straight in the air, he started toward my traps. The big monkey saw this and went all to pieces. He started jumping up and down and making deep grunting noises as if he were talking to the little monkey. The little monkey seemed to understand what the big monkey was saying. He squealed like someone had stepped on his tail and scurried back to the others. It was hard for me to believe that what I had seen, yet it was as plain as the stripes in a rainbow. That big monkey had known that the little monkey was in danger, and in his monkey talk he had simply told him so. "Rowdy," I whispered, "did you see what that monkey was doing? He was talking to that little monkey. That's what he was doing. Grandpa didn't tell me that they could talk to each other." As if he were proud of the fact that he had knocked me out of a $2 reward, the big monkey then did something that all but caused me to swallow my Adam's apple. Looking straight at my hiding place, he peeled his lips back, opened his mouth, and let out another one of those squalls. When he did, I got a good look at his fighting tools. I had thought that our old mules had big mouths and teeth, but they were nothing compared to what that monkey had. To me, it looked as if you could have thrown a pumpkin straight down his throat and never scratched the peeling on one of his long teeth. "Holy smokes, Rowdy," I whispered. "Did you see those teeth? You better think twice before you jump on him. He could eat you up, collar and all." Old Rowdy didn't seem to be the least bit scared. If I had said sick him, he would have torn out of those elders like a cyclone. He may have taken a whipping, but there would have been a lot of monkey hair flying around while it was going on. I didn't have to worry about the big monkey jumping on us. Instead, he turned and, still making those deep grunting noises, he walked up within 2 feet of a trap and stopped. For several seconds, he just stood there, looking at the apple and all around at the ground. He kept making funny little noises as if he were talking to himself. The strain was almost more than I could stand. My insides got all knotted up, and I felt like I was going to bust wide open. If the monkey hadn't done something about then, I think I would have. Instead of stepping in my trap, he just reached out with one of those long arms, took hold of the apple, and pulled on it until the nail came out. Holding the apple in his paw about like I would if I were eating one, he opened his huge mouth, took one bite, and tossed what was left to the little monkeys. This caused a loud commotion. The little monkeys started fighting over the apple. I never heard so much squealing and chattering. In no time, there wasn't as much as a seed left. I sat there as if I were frozen to the ground and watched that big monkey walk all around the burrow, taking the apples and never stepping in a trap. One bite from each apple seemed to be all he wanted. What was left was tossed to the little monkeys. When the last apple had disappeared, the big monkey did something that made me wonder if I wasn't seeing things. He started turning somersaults and rolling around on the ground. At the same time, he was making the bottoms ring with a peculiar noise that he hadn't made before. Now, I had never heard a monkey laugh, and I didn't even know they could, but as I sat there watching the capers of that big monkey, it didn't take me long to figure out what he was doing. He was laughing at me. I was sure of it. I even remembered the dream I had about the $100 monkey, how every time he came leaping by, he would stop and laugh at me. The little monkeys seemed to know that something funny was going on. They started screeching and chattering like a bunch of squirrels in a hickory nut tree. My neck and face got all hot. I knew I was blushing, but I couldn't help it. That was the first time I had ever had a monkey laugh at me. I looked at old Rowdy. The way I was feeling, if he had been laughing, I would have taken a stick to him. But Rowdy wasn't laughing. He was just as serious about catching those monkeys as I was. All at once, the big monkey stopped making a fool out of himself and turned to the little monkeys. Uttering a couple of those deep grunts, he just seemed to rise up in the air like fog off the river and disappeared in the branches of the bur oak tree. The little monkeys followed him, zip, 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 one behind the other. After the monkeys had all disappeared, it got so still around there you could have heard a grasshopper walking. I looked at Rowdy, and Rowdy looked at me. "Did you ever see anything like that, Rowdy?" I said. "Grandpa was right when he said that monkey was smart, but I didn't think he was that smart. Why, he knew all the time that we were here. And he sat right up there on that sycamore limb and watched me set my traps. Then he stole all my apples and laughed at me. Now, how do you like that?" My first go around with the monkeys left me a little discouraged, but not too much. After all, my grandpa had taught me practically all there was to know about the trapping business. I figured it was just a matter of time until I'd have them all in the sack. Trying to act like nothing had happened, I said, "Rowdy, that monkey may not know it, but he's messing around with one of the best trappers in these Cherokee Hills. If he comes back one more time, we'll see who does the laughing. Let's try the old mouse catching trick on him. I think that will stop the laughing business." Rowdy whined and licked my hand. That gave me a lot of confidence, and I felt much better. Taking 3 more of my apples, I set them up on a log. Then, taking my pocket knife, I cut them in half. Walking over to where my traps were, I lifted them from their hiding places and tripped the triggers with a stick. Untying the strings from the nails and bushes, I used the short pieces to tie half an apple to the trigger of each trap. I wrapped those pieces of apple to the top of the triggers as tightly as I could and tied the ends of the strings in hard knots. Then I reset the traps and placed them back in the holes. Very carefully, I covered each trap with leaves but left the apples in plain sight. So basically, he has the apple tied to the trigger on the traps, and he's covering the trap with leaves, but you can still see the apple, thinking that the monkeys will grab it. Backing off to one side, I took another good look at my trap setting. Every time I had set a trap, I had been very proud of the way I had done it. But on that day, I was especially proud. You could see the piece of apple all right, but you sure couldn't tell there were any traps there. Not one shiny piece of metal could be seen. Rowdy, I said, I don't care how smart that monkey is. If he gets one of those apples, he's going to wind up with a trap on his foot. That's all there is to it. All the time I was resetting my traps, I kept looking around in the trees for a monkey. I didn't see one, but I had a feeling that there were 10,000 monkey eyeballs looking right at me. Feeling about as smart as old Trapper Dan himself, I said, Come on, Rowdy. I think the money will start rolling in now. I didn't go straight back to my hiding place. Instead, I took off in another direction, circled around, and came back to it. I thought that I was being smart doing this, but I felt silly too. Because if that big monkey was sitting somewhere in the top of the sycamore tree, he was probably watching every move I made. I was so sure that I could catch a monkey this time, I didn't sit down on my gunny sack. I held it in my hand so that I would be ready to sack him up the instant I heard the snap of the trap. It seemed that Rowdy and I had hardly gotten seated when here came the monkeys, leaping, squealing, and chattering. Boy, Rowdy, I whispered. That sure was fast, wasn't it? They must have been waiting for us. By the way they're acting, they must think we're playing some kind of game. They won't think it's a game when I get a few of them in the sack. It was a little different this time than it was before. The big monkey was the first one to touch the ground, and he was standing very close to one of the traps. The little monkeys were milling around everywhere. They didn't seem to know what was going on, but every time one got close to a trap, that big monkey would fly out of gear like a mama jaybird when I wanted to take a look at her babies. He would scream like someone had slapped a branding iron in and start jumping up and down and making those deep grunting noises. Branding iron, knows you've seen cattle and they get the insignia of a ranch on it and they burn it into their rear ends. And he would run at the little monkeys and scare the daylights out of them. Finally, he succeeded in herding them all to one side where they bunched up and stayed. If I had known then what that big monkey was going to do next, I would have stayed there and watched it. I wouldn't have stayed there and watched it. Again, he walked over close to one of my traps and stopped. I knew that I was watching a monkey, but he still looked like a small boy standing there, trying to figure something out. Once he even bent over so that he could get a better look at things. Then he reached up with one of his long arms and scratched his head. When I saw him do when I saw him do that, I thought of my grandpa. He was always scratching his head when he had something heavy on his mind. Rowdy, I whispered. I believe that monkey knows the trap is there and he's trying to figure out how he can get the apple and not get caught. I don't think he can do it. I don't care how smart he is. He's not that smart. How wrong I was. As if he had solved the problem and was tickled to death about it, the big monkey turned a few somersaults. He stopped and stared straight at my hiding place. Then he let out another one of those squalls before he reached down and picked up a long stick from the ground. Holding the stick out in front of him, still uttering those deep grunts, he started beating the apple as if he were killing a snake. I almost jumped out of my britches when I heard the trap snap. I sat in a trance and watched that $100 monkey spring every one of my traps the same way. Every time a trap snapped, he would look straight at my hiding place and squall. He didn't use his teeth to tear the apples from the triggers. He simply used his fingers and untied the knots in the strings. There was one thing I could say for that monkey. He wasn't only smart, he was very polite too. He saw to it that the little monkeys got their share of each apple. After it was all over and the monkeys had again disappeared in the treetops, I looked to Rowdy for some kind of understanding. I didn't get any help from him. He was just lying there with his long ears sticking straight up, looking at me as if he were the most surprised hound dog in the world. I was so dumbfounded I couldn't even think straight, much less say anything. For several seconds I sat there staring at the ground and trying to remember everything that had happened. The more I thought about how that big monkey had outsmarted me, the madder I got. Rowdy, I said, I wish I had brought Papa's old shotgun along. I'd sure warm that monkey's hide with some birdshot. It's bad enough that he made a fool out of me, but he didn't have to laugh like that. I put my lunch and apples back in the gunny sack and walked over to where my traps were. Mashing the springs down with my foot, I released the sticks from the jaws. I put the traps back in my sack. Then I sat down on a stump to do a little thinking. I could remember every trick my grandpa had taught me about trapping, but I couldn't think of a thing that would catch a monkey. The more I thought about everything, the more disgusted I got. Talking to myself, I said, there's only one thing I can do. I have to get rid of that smart aleck monkey. If I can get rid of him, I believe I can catch the little ones. They don't have to have any sense at all. I'll just go to the house, get Papa's gun, and do away with that monkey once and for all. Then I thought, what in the world am I thinking of? I can't do that. Why, it'd be like hanging $100 bill in a tree and shooting it all to pieces. And there was the old man in the mountains. If I shot one of those silly old monkeys, there was no telling what he'd do. Old Rowdy saved the day for me, or at least I thought so at that time. About 15 feet from the stump I was sitting on was a big hollow log. Rowdy was over there sniffing around. He never could keep a sniffer out of anything that had a hole in it. He just couldn't do things like that. The instant I saw the log, a plan jumped right out of the hollow end and bored its way into my monkey-troubled mind. I walked over to the log, got down on my knees, and looked back into the hollow. It was perfect. The hole was large and went back about 4 feet. I was so pleased I could have kissed old Rowdy, but he never did like to be kissed. Patting the log with my hand, I said, Rowdy, you could have sniffed all over these bottoms and not found anything this good. This is just what I've been looking for. I put my apples back in the hollow and set my traps out here in front. Now, if that smart monkey wants an apple, I'll have to wade through all my traps to get one. If he can do that and not get caught, then we're just beat, and that's all there is to it. Rowdy seemed to know that I was pleased about something. He reared up on me and tickled my ear with his long pink tongue. Come to think of it, Rowdy, I said, I'm starving to death for a drink of water. Let's go get a drink first, and then we'll really get after these monkeys. Not far away, at the upper end of an old slough, the cool, clear water of a spring gushed out from under the roots of a huge gum tree. I always figured that the spring belonged to Rowdy and me. We had discovered it in one of our exploring trips. I even named it J. Berry Spring. Hold on, it's my wife calling. Yes, dear. Yeah, hold on, I'm going to give you to Kyla. We had a good drink, and I washed my hot face in the cool water. There was never a time that Rowdy and I prowled those Cherokee bottoms that we didn't run into all kinds of surprises. But when I got back to the bur oak tree, I got the biggest surprise of my life. Everything I owned was gone. My gunny sack, lunch, apples, traps, and all. Rowdy, I said, looking all around. I know I left that sack right here by the stump. Now it's gone, and everything we had was in it. I wonder what happened to it. Rowdy started sniffing around the stump. Then he trailed over to a big sycamore, reared up on it, looked at me, and whined. What are you doing that for, boy? I asked him. You know that sack couldn't climb a tree. Regardless of what I said, Rowdy seemed to think the sack could climb the tree. He started bawling the tree bark. I had never known my old dog to lie, so I looked up into the branches of the big sycamore. What I saw all but caused me to fall over backwards. Sitting on a limb with his back against the trunk was that $100 monkey. He was just sitting there, as big as you please, with a sandwich in one paw and an apple in the other, eating away and looking straight at me. He had passed out my apples to some of the little monkeys. They were sitting around on the limbs, chewing away and peering at me with their beady little eyes. I could see my gunny sack with the traps in it draped over a limb. I felt the anger start way down in my feet. It burned its way through my body and exploded in my head. Why, you thieving rascal? I yelled. You can't get away with this. You give that stuff back to me. I saw right away that that big monkey had no intention of giving anything back to me. He stood up on the limb and started jumping up and down and laughing, fit to kill. This made me so mad I came close to cussing a little. While hanging around my grandpa's store, I had learned a few cuss words from the men, but I never did use them. I was afraid to. Daisy had told me that if any boy who wasn't 21 years old yet cussed, his tongue would rot out of his head. So I just didn't do any cussing. I didn't figure that I could get along without my tongue. But I was so mad at that monkey, I had to do something. I'm going to have to actually stop because I think this video might cut off. Part 3 is going to be way short.